Good evening and welcome. Buenas noches y bienvenidos. I am Justice Sally Manzanet, and as the president of the Latino Judges Association, I am proud to present this evening's program, Para Todos los Niños, Mendez versus Westminster, a seminal case toward desegregation. The evening of April 14th was chosen for tonight's program as it marks the 74th anniversary of this vitally important case in our nation's jurisprudence. The importance of this precedent, which predates Brown versus Board of Education, and the critical role it played in setting the stage for the United States Supreme Court's reversal of the separate but equal doctrine, cannot be overstated. Indeed, our incredible panel this evening, led by our very own New York State Court of Appeals Judge Jenny Rivera, will explore the impact and importance of this case. I want to extend our thanks and gratitude for the support of our co-sponsors: Latino Justice PearlDeaf, Center on Latinx Rights and Equality at CUNY Law, the Judicial Institute, the Franklin H. Williams Judicial Commission, and the Historical Society of New York State Courts. A special thank you to the staff of the Judicial Institute and the Historical Society of New York State Courts for their incredible technical support. We could not have done it without you. Lastly, I would be remiss if I did not give my personal thanks to my LJA board and fellow committee members of this project. To our chair, the Honorable Patria Frias Colon, the Honorable Wilma Guzman, the Honorable Joanne Quiñones, the Honorable Yanet Rosado, the Honorable Javier Vargas, and the Honorable Lourdes Ventura. Thank you for your tireless work and dedication to make tonight a success. You make us proud. We are certain you will be enriched and enlightened by tonight's program, and I thank you for choosing to join us tonight. Without further ado, I turn the program over to my fellow board colleague and visionary of tonight's program and the chair of the Mendez versus Westminster Project Committee, the Honorable Patria Frias Colon. Enjoy.
Thank you, Justice Mansonet Daniels. Good evening, all. I'm Patria Frias Colon, a judge assigned to the Kings County Civil Court, and tonight I have the distinct pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Senior Associate Judge of the New York Court of Appeals, Jenny Rivera. I will not read her biography, but encourage all of you to do so. You will see what an amazing advocate she has been and continues to be. When I introduced the idea of the Mendez event to the board of the Latino Judges Association last year, Judge Rivera was our logical choice to moderate this event. Why? Because Judge Rivera has dedicated her life to champion the causes of marginalized communities. And who better to guide this conversation than Judge Rivera? I mean, she's smart, supportive, and a sister not to be reckoned with. She is our quiet storm. And without hesitation, she immediately committed herself to this project. What we didn't know was that Judge Rivera not only knew about this incredible story, but in fact incorporated it into her CUNY Law School curriculum. Judge Rivera is a trailblazer who spent her entire professional career in the service of others. I can personally attest to this since I know her for almost 30 years, and I've seen her in action firsthand. From her work at Latino Justice, formerly known as PearlDeaf, to key clerkships, including with the Honorable Sonia Sotomayor while at the Southern District, to her work at the Legal Aid Society where she fought for the homeless, at the New York Attorney General's office where she fought for civil rights, and the list goes on. Judge Rivera has been recognized for her steadfast commitment to others, including receiving the American Bars Association Spirit of Excellence Award, and the New York State Bars Association's Diversity Trailblazer Lifetime Achievement Award. She received her undergraduate degree from Princeton, her law degree from NYU as a Ruth Tilden Scholar, and her LLM from Columbia. Before I turn the program over to my friend and colleague, Justice Lourdes M. Ventura of the Supreme Court in Queens County, who will introduce our esteemed panelists, I'd like to thank our committee. And as chair of the Latino Judges Association's committee that spearheaded tonight's event, I want to personally thank the judges who said presente and joined this committee. Of course, our courageous leader, Sally Mansonet Daniels, also Marianne Briganti, Wilma Guzman, Joanne Quiñones, Ginette Rosado, Javier Vargas, and Lourdes M. Ventura. Justice Ventura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Judge Frias Colon. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our esteemed panelists, starting off with Judge Frederick Aguirre, who has served the legal community as an attorney and judge with passion and dignity for over 43 years. In 2017, after serving 15 years on the bench, he retired from the Orange County Superior Court and now serves as mediator, arbitrator, and private judge. As a judge, he presided over numerous cases in the areas of family law, government liability, business contractual matters, and all types of personal injury, including medical malpractice. Prior to the bench, he was in private practice for 28 years and was the managing general partner of a 92-unit retirement community in Placentia, California. Judge Aguirre is a 1971 graduate of the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law, and has been heavily involved in the community throughout his career. We also have with us here today my former colleague and friend, Jose Perez, who is the Deputy General Counsel for Latino Justice PearlDev and has served as its legal director since 2007. He has been the lead lawyer in a number of Latino justices' precedent-setting immigrants' rights cases, including establishing eviction protections for undocumented tenants in New York City, precluding private landlords from inquiring about immigration status of prospective tenants, limiting local police enforcement of administrative immigration warrants, and the Cesar Vargas New York bar admission case, establishing that the Character and Fitness Committee can determine a documented law graduate's bar admission eligibility. Jose is a 1985 graduate of St. John's University School of Law, where he created the nationally recognized Spanish street law community education program. He began his legal career as a prosecutor with the Queens County District Attorney's Office and subsequently worked in various capacities at the New York City Housing Authority, the Legal Aid Society Juvenile Rights and Civil Divisions, the Hofstra University Law School Housing Rights and Disability Law Clinics, and the New York State Attorney General's Office Consumer Frauds and Protection Bureau, where he developed the Latino Immigration Services Fraud Consumer Protection Initiative, also known as the Notario Fraud. Jose also works very closely with Latino justices' many innovative pre-law pipeline programs and has mentored numerous college and law students of color over the past 3 decades. I also have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Sandra Roby, who is the Emmy-winning writer-producer of the PBS documentary Mendez versus Westminster for All the Children, which you will view later in today's program. Sandra grew up in Westminster and considers the promotion and celebration of Mendez to be her life's work. Through Sandra's efforts, Mendez has been honored at the White House, commemorated on a US postage stamp, and featured in the Los Angeles Museum of Tolerance. Her film has been screened at Harvard, Stanford, the Smithsonian, and hundreds of presentations across the United States. Inspired by Mendez versus Westminster, Sandra has curated an historic tour in Old Town Orange, where folks can see that last standing Mexican school from the segregation era, a formerly segregated swimming pool and movie theater, as well as the graves of Confederate and Union soldiers in Orange County. Sandra is also producing a social justice comedy showcase entitled Sandra Roby's Lady Parts, which debuted in Orange County in January 2020 and includes the topics of Mendez versus Westminster, LGBTQ, and #MeToo. She aims to continue her passion and life's work through this pandemic and thereafter. And last but not least, we have Sylvia Mendez, the heart of the Mendez versus Westminster case. She was born in Orange County and attended Orange Coast Community College, where she earned her Associate of Arts degree in nursing. She went on to California State University at Los Angeles, where she earned her Bachelor of Science degree in nursing and a certificate in public health. In 2012, Sylvia received an honorary degree of Doctor of Humane Letters from Brooklyn College at the City University of New York. Sylvia Mendez worked for 33 years as a nurse at the Los Angeles University of Southern California Medical Center. In her final 5 years of service, she held the position of Assistant Nursing Director of the Pediatric Pavilion. She adopted 2 daughters and has 4 grandchildren. She spends her retirement traveling abroad, has visited all 7 continents, and enjoys spending time with her family and educating others on the Mendez versus Westminster case. Sylvia has received several Lifetime Achievement Awards and certificates of recognition for her efforts to advocate for education. In 2004, President Bush told the Mendez story during his Hispanic Heritage Celebration at the White House. In 2010, President Obama mentioned Sylvia during his Women's History Month speech, and the following year awarded Sylvia with the Medal of Freedom. Sylvia was also able to witness the dedication of the first Mendez School in Santa Ana, California. She was also inducted into the Hall of Fame at Santa Ana College and was selected as one of the hot 25 persons in Orange County. I now turn the program over to our moderator, Judge Jenny Rivera.
Thank you. Thank you, Judge Frias Colon, for that generous and very kind introduction. Really lovely of you to say that. And as I say, back at you. It is my pleasure to moderate this Latino Judges Association program. We will begin with a documentary on the Mendez v. Westminster litigation, directed, as you have heard, by Sandra Roby, one of our panelists. We will then have our panel discussion, followed by a question and answer session beginning at approximately 7:30. Please note that the participant chat is not available during this program, but will be open for submission of questions at the conclusion of the panel. Now, we are very fortunate this evening to present as a backdrop to our discussion, Westminster for All the Children, para todos los niños, a 2002 documentary written, directed, and produced by our panelist, Sandra Roby. The film features, of course, Sylvia Mendez, our other panelists, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom honoree. The film has been shown on PBS, and our documentarian has won an Emmy and a Golden Mike Award. Now, I met Sandra many years ago, and I haven't seen her in a long time, so I'm so happy we could at least see each other again through the great technology we have on Zoom. Sandra was at that time when I met her touring the country, at times with Sylvia, in a van promoting her film and the story of the Mendez family and the litigation they spearheaded to desegregate the Orange County elementary schools. It's an incredible work of art and a testament to Sandra's commitment to this particular issue and educating our communities. I was indeed shocked because I was a law professor who had never heard of this case. And as Judge Frias Colon already mentioned, once I heard of the case, I immediately incorporated it into my curriculum at CUNY Law School. We hope that you are inspired by this telling of true events. The film is a jewel. If you have already seen it, then you will be one of the lucky ones to see it more than once. If this is your first time, as they say, get ready for a great story.
Hi everyone, I'm Sandra Roby, the writer-producer of the Emmy-winning documentary Mendez versus Westminster for All the Children. And I am so happy to bring to you now the opportunity to see Mendez versus Westminster for free. It's been my goal to see that Mendez is taught across the country, and 2022 will be the 75-year anniversary of Mendez versus Westminster. We can make this party happen, so let's do it. And make no mistake, I am a total Mendez maniac. But hear this. Black Lives Matter. Make America gay again. I am all about social justice and respect and inclusion for everyone. So as you're watching the documentary, please try to notice the groups, people of different colors all across the country who are coming together to fight an injustice that didn't just change 4 small school districts in Orange County, but ended up impacting our nation and the world. So finally, 70 years after Brown versus Board of Education desegregated our schools, Mendez versus Westminster can help to desegregate the way we talk about American civil rights history, because we are all connected. So when you watch the film, please collect your questions and your thoughts and contact me on my website, sandraroby.com. That's Sandra, ROBBIE.com. And I would love to hear your thoughts. And please sign up for Mendez Million. It's a community group that I'm starting to help to share ideas and ways that we can send the Mendez message across the country in time for the 2022 anniversary. We're going to be having Mendez Mondays, Zoom meetings, and all kinds of other fun things. So check it out. And also when you're on the website, check out some new stuff that I'm working on. I have developed a one-woman show called Sandra Roby's Lady Parts. That's right, Sandra Roby's Lady Parts. And it incorporates humor and lots of insights that I've gleaned from working on Mendez. And it's all about the box that we put ourselves and others in every day. And we all know we are more than the box. There are more parts to me than just Mendez. And I want to lovingly and laughingly share those ideas with you. So check that out. So you're about ready to watch the film? Keep this in mind. This is a very humble half-hour film. And what you're going to see at the front is a short 2-minute excerpt that was not part of the original. It is an interview with a gentleman named Robert L. Carter, who worked with Thurgood Marshall, and he's going to explain the direct connection between Mendez versus Westminster and Brown versus Board of Education, which I feel is so powerful. And also, remember, very humble film, so there's no car chases, no dinosaurs, no fancy computer graphics, no explosions, except for what I'm hoping will be going off in here as you learn of a story that is unlike anything taught in our history books right now. And you can see the connections, because this is one of the other important lessons I have learned from Mendez, is the stories we tell us who we are and who we can be. So I'm hoping that in learning about Mendez, you can see a story that shows people of all colors working together to affirm the worthiness and the value and the freedoms of everyone. And that's the American dream I'm working toward. So thank you so much. I'm Sandra Roby. Check out sandraroby.com and go Mendez. Peace out.
When we talk about the landmark school desegregation case, Brown versus Board of Education, the names that come to mind most frequently are Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren and NAACP attorney Thurgood Marshall. The name of the man who actually wrote the argument for Brown versus Board of Education is not so readily known. His name is Robert L. Carter, and he, like Thurgood Marshall and Earl Warren, was also involved in the Mendez case. He is now a judge in New York City, and his chambers have a sweeping view of the city below. He spoke with me in June 2003 about the historic link between Mendez versus Westminster and Brown versus Board of Education.
Before I went into the Army, no, after I came out of the Army, I guess, I came in contact with it in this case, Westminster versus School Board, which is a case in California.
Westminster.
In which these Spanish-speaking children, as I recall, were the school board was segregating them, keeping them together on the theory that they would learn English better that way, or some such thing. But it ended up with there being, like blacks in the South, with the facilities being unequal and so forth. And when I learned about that, I think it was the time Thurgood was sick, Thurgood Marshall, my boss, was sick and not in the office. And what I did was to get the documentation and try to write a brief, and the brief being segregation per se was unconstitutional. And to utilize that, as a matter of fact, as the model for the brief, eventually in Brown versus the Board of Education, which I wrote. So that's the link between my Westminster and Brown.
It was never mentioned at home. I actually didn't find out about it till I went away to college, UC Riverside. I went to UC Riverside. I took a Chicano studies class. And although we didn't study that part of the book, I just happened to be going through the back and saw Mendez. And I looked at the story. My parents' names are rather unique, Gonzalo and Felicitas. So I figured it can't be a coincidence. So, and of course it had my brother, Gonzalo, and Jeronimo and Sylvia's name, so I knew. So I called home and I said, I found this story. And by that time my father had passed away. He died when I was 13. So my mother just said, oh yeah. I said, oh yeah, that's it? And she said, oh yeah, we did that. That happened before you were born. And it was no big deal to my parents at that time.
My father always wanted to be a farmer, and he wanted to be the boss, knowing that he had always been the grape picker and the orange picker. So during the war, something horrible happened. The Japanese were put in internment camps. And his banker told my father, Gonzalo, you always wanted to be the boss, so why don't you lease the land from the Minomitzos? They're in internment camp, but they want to lease the land so they won't lose it. So he went and he arranged with the Minomitzos. I remember we went to the camp and they signed papers, and we got the ranch. He sold the cafe and he rented out the houses in San Diego, and we moved back to Westminster where he had grown up.
My sister and I were sick before they went to the camp because we had chicken pox. So we were put in the hospital, my sister and I, by ourselves, and my parents all went to the internment camp. So we were left behind. We were in the hospital for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and they were happy to see us go because we would run up and down the hospital and ask for food all the time. Just little kids, we were little kids. And so when we got well, a nurse took us all the way to Arizona. And I remember when we got into Arizona near the camp, I saw my mother on the platform. She was crying. Poston, that was in Arizona. I remember that Mr. Monroe, the banker man, I remember that he was the go-between the families, and he got the Mendez family and my father and my brother, I guess, together, and they leased the land to them, and that's how we came to know each other. Yeah, and he was a very honest man. He was a hard worker, and I think that he had a very personable appearance about him. He's a very personable person. Yeah, because my sister and I would sit there and go, gee, he's nice looking. Little, you know how little kids are.
When we came back to Westminster, it was like 1943, and he decided that he would ask my Aunt Sally to take us and go enroll us in Westminster School. We were living on Edward Street, so we weren't living where he had been raised. He had been raised in the Mexican district there on Olive Street, where all the Mexicans lived. Now we lived all the way on the other side of Westminster, where the farm was. And so he told my Aunt Sally, Sally, take her to school and enroll the kids and enroll them there on 17th Street. Because that's where we belong, that's the district we belong. So when she gathered us all up, it was Gonzalo and Jerome and her two children. It was Alice and Virginia. So when we got to the school, they told her, Miss Vidari, you can leave your kids here, but your brother's kids, Gonzalo's kids, will have to go to the Mexican school. The Mexicans are segregated here in Westminster. They have to go to the Mexican school. But my Aunt Sally said, well, why am I going to leave mine here? She says, well, yours don't have to go there. You know, my Aunt Sally's last name was Vidari. She had married a Mexican that was part French, and his last name was Vidari. And the kids were very light skinned, Alice and Virginia. So she said, well, I'm not leaving my kids here if you won't take my brother's kids. My kids will not stay. So she gathered us all up and she took us home. And when she got home, she told my dad, Gonzalo, they will not allow your kids there. And my father said, oh, Sally, he used to call her Soledad, don't worry about it. I'll go and speak to the principal tomorrow.
Mexican children were segregated throughout the Southwest. This begins in Orange County around 1913, when Mexican children were separated from Anglo-American children on integrated schools. And by 1919, the school district of Santa Ana decided to segregate Mexican children into their own schools. So in 1919, the first segregated school was established in Orange County. And after that, children were routinely segregated so that by 1930, there were 15 Mexican schools distributed throughout the county. Orange County was not any different from other areas of the Southwest. Los Angeles routinely segregated Mexican children into what were called neighborhood schools. One study found that somewhere between 80 and 90% of all school districts segregated Mexican children in the Southwest.
Pretty much everything was segregated. The housing was segregated. There were what were called racially restrictive covenants, and these covenants forbid anybody who was not Anglo or of European descent from owning property. And oftentimes what they would say is that if you're Mexican, you're Indian, and therefore you cannot own this property, or it would specifically just exclude Mexicans. One of the other really common forms of segregation in Southern California were the public pools during the summer. And one particular example is the plunge in Orange, which would allow Mexicans in only on Mondays. It was known as Mexican Day. And that was the day the pool was drained, and the next day it was cleaned and refilled so that Anglos could swim in it the day after the Mexicans had been there. Also, the theaters in Santa Ana and most of the large cities were segregated. Mexicans sat in the balcony and Anglos sat down below.
So the next day he came and he went to the school and he said, we like to enroll the kids here. We live in this district. When we were in Santa Ana, we lived in the Mexican district and the kids were going to a Freeman school, which was all Mexican, but now we live in the whites district. Why aren't you allowing our kids to go here? And they said, well, in Westminster, the kids are segregated. The Mexicans have to go to Mexican schools. But why? He says, well, in certain areas in Orange County, we are allowed to segregate. And it was Garden Grove, it was Westminster, it was El Modena, Santa Ana that were allowed to segregate the Mexicans from the whites. He said to the principal, well, you'll hear from me. So the next day he decided he'd go to the school board here in Westminster, and they told him the same thing. I'm sorry, Mr. Mendez, but there's nothing we can do. So he decided to go to the school board, the Orange County School Board, and they told him, well, Mr. Mendez, they said the same thing. Well, my father thought it was such an injustice because the school in Westminster, the Hoover School, was made out of, it was a terrible little shack. I don't even remember having any monkey bars or any swings or anything like that to play with. In fact, when we had to eat lunch, we would go outside and eat lunch in the tables that were right next to the cow pasture, so we'd get all the flies there from the cow pasture. There was wire around the cow pasture because to keep the cows out, but it was electrocuted. There was a little bit of electricity. At that time, it was allowed to have a little bit of electricity on the wires to keep the cows from getting too close to the fence. So my father thought that was so horrible. So then he was talking to this man that used to come to the farm and bring the produce from, to take the produce back to Los Angeles, to Alameda. And he said, Mr. Mendez, I know about a lawyer, Mr. Marquez, that will help you. He will fight. He has fought where the Mexicans aren't allowed to go to the parks in Los Angeles, and they're not allowed to go to the swimming pools until Sunday when the water's very dirty. Then they're allowed to, but they can't go during the week. He said he has fought those two cases and he has won. I'm sure he'll help you. Well, at that time he was making a lot of money. It was during the war. They used to make like $1,000 a day. They had like 40 acres of asparagus, and they had leased some other acres from another man, and it was tomatoes. They were growing tomatoes and chilies, and so he had the money. So he decided he hired the lawyer and he started working on it. Well, at that time there was a group in Santa Ana and that was fighting this case, and he went to them and he asked them, "Can you help me? Because I want to fight this." And at that time they did not want to help him. They refused to help, and I remember because my mother told me that he came crying. He says, "Can you believe this, Fela? They will not help me fight this case, and here they are supposed to be fighting for the Mexicans." My mother says, "We can do it alone. We have the money right now." So they proceeded.
What happened was through coordination of folks like Hector Durango in Santa Ana and Fred Ross, who was an Anglo who helped a lot of the movements in the area, came in and they went around. They said, "You have a cousin, Bob Torres, over in El Medina. You have a cousin in Garden Grove or Westminster or Santa Ana. Can we set this up?" And they set up a test case in each district, and then they filed the lawsuit.
During the time that they were fighting, my father was taking the lawyer all over to the different areas, and they decided that he would be the one to accompany, and my mother ran the farm. That time she was running the 40 acres. She had workers. She had braceros from Mexico. They were working here legally. At that time, the Mexicans were allowed to come here legally and work. And so she ran all the farm, and my dad was out there with the lawyers, and he was meeting with different people. He was meeting with the people from Santa Ana. He was meeting with the people from El Medina. And they finally went to court. And when they went to court, they won the first time in the Superior Court. They won, and Judge McCormick said that it was totally illegal what they were doing. So he said, "From now on, we will not have segregation." Well, the Westminster School Board decided to appeal, because anytime anybody wins the case, you always have the right to appeal, and they appealed the case.
Judge McCormick's decision in the district court, which is the trial court, and actually a trial did take place over several weeks, and several of the schools districts had testimony, and he heard testimony from the kids, and he heard testimony from experts. And the critical part of this case is the attorney, David Marcus. He put on evidence not only with the children, but he brought in experts, sociologists and education experts who said that segregation was bad for the children. It gave them a sense of inferiority. It was noted that they wouldn't learn English or be Americanized or learn our culture if they were segregated. They had to be integrated. And so he listened to that. And he was the first judge that I've ever read, and I've talked to several professors, and this case is now mentioned in a lot of law schools in California. This was the first time any judge ever wrote an opinion that said separate is never equal. And he said the separate facilities, even if they were equal, were not permissible under the 14th Amendment based on national origin. Now the parties agreed that everybody was Caucasian, but what they said was they're discriminated because they're of Mexican or Latin origin. And so that was a huge step in civil rights, and it drew the attention of the NAACP, the National Lawyers Guild, and a whole host of other national civil rights groups who filed what are called friend of the court briefs for the appeal.
I think one of the most important things is you and Dad both told us how at first nobody wanted to help, and they criticized him for being involved, and why do you want to be involved? Why do you want to make trouble? And so
people weren't. They didn't. They figured that they were going to be bothered, and they rather stayed the way it was than try to fix it.
I think any people who are in a vulnerable position are afraid to make themselves more vulnerable. They're afraid to make waves and afraid to upset the status quo, even if the status quo is not what it should be. So it takes people who are willing to take a chance to change things. My father was a member of the LULAC, and he had been trying to convince them to help. And then, so eventually when they saw that there was some momentum, they did come in, and they were very instrumental from that point on. My mom kind of took care of the business so my father could be doing all, going to the meetings and going up to Sacramento. And I know there in the store and in our house is where a lot of the meetings were held.
I hardly see my husband. He was always on meetings.
The folks returning from the war really saw that they could be treated equally and should be.
I was discharged from the service in May of 1946, and that school semester, October and September, I was involved in it because my daughter Janice, the smallest daughter, she was enrolled in the school at the Roosevelt School, which was a non-segregated school. And pretty soon here's 10 other children that went in, and their parents said, well, how come you enrolled the Perez family and you won't take our children? And we already had one daughter at that school there, Carol, the oldest. And so Hammerstein, the principal, the superintendent of the schools, he thought that the easiest way to solve the problem was to transfer my daughter to the Lincoln School, which was a segregated school. And there all heck broke loose right there.
During the Ninth Circuit Court, there was appeals that were sent in, briefs, and it was from the American Jewish Congress, it was one from the Japanese Congress, it was Lawyers Guild, and the NAACP, and Thurgood Marshall was also involved in the Mendez because he had sent briefs in because he was a lawyer for the NAACP.
The National Lawyers Guild, the NAACP, argued that America could not be like Nazi Germany and segregate the different races of Europe, for example.
And they all fought, and finally they did win. A few months later, Governor Ward, he was a governor at that time here in California, and he decided that he would desegregate the whole California after this trial. June 1947. So California has always been number one. That was 8 years before the Brown versus Board of Education, when the whole nation was desegregated. We say that in the Mendez case, the two very important people, Thurgood Marshall, that helped the Mendez and later became the lawyer for the Brown versus the Board of Education, and Governor Warren, who was our governor here in desegregated California, later was a Supreme Court justice that desegregated the whole nation. The two people that were involved in the Mendez case later desegregated the whole nation.
When the plan was first developed to fully integrate Hoover School by busing children from various parts of the district, that would be Anglo children from various parts of the district to the Hoover School, there was obviously some concern on the part of the parents who were not familiar with the situation and didn't want their children to be bused. And Mr. Peters helped to forestall that criticism by busing his own daughter to the Hoover School rather than sending her to the school which was in his immediate neighborhood.
When we won the case, we were living in Santa Ana, and I remember I had to go to an all-white school. And when I went, it was very difficult at first because they didn't have any Mexicans in the school, and they didn't want any, and it was very difficult at first. It was always in trouble. But what was really amazing is that kids forget quick. And it wasn't long before I was getting along with all the kids and being invited to go places with them, and even to their homes. which was very unusual because I remember the first time I was invited to go spend the night, my mother was against it. She couldn't believe that I'd go spend the night at a white people's house. And so, and me being young, not knowing the difference, I did the same thing. I invited him over to the house. And my mother really had a fit. You can't do that. You can't bring a white boy over here to this neighborhood. But it worked out fine. If they're integrated and they grow up from a young age, they don't have that prejudice that existed back then so badly, because they grow up together. They might call each other names, but usually they're like most kids. In a few minutes it's gone. And it doesn't matter if he's a Latino or black or Oriental, because they're growing up together, all together in the same schools. So they're like, well, what the country says, united. They're all united, that's what they are. And they make one country. And I think that's probably the greatest part of it.
I really didn't realize that much prejudice was there at that time. I'm really surprised, because the three of us would play together while they were fighting this issue. And so I really didn't realize it was to that degree, but I'm glad that they did, because everyone, deserves a good education. Mm-hmm. That's what United States is about, I think. And I'm glad that they did that. I'm very proud of that Mendez family. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
From my father's perspective, he was doing a good thing by leasing to another family while they were in camp. But as I look at it, the bigger picture, it's really interesting how the prejudice sent our family to camp during those years. But it was interesting too that how the story now shows that the lack of prejudice, how we leased the land to a Mexican family who we really trusted, and they cared for the land really well. But it really benefited and blessed our family in the long run, that they could come home, back to their land, back to their home. And I think it's just a really great story about how, prejudice really hurts the opportunity for all kinds of people.
I think I blocked most of it out. I probably didn't realize there was prejudice in this world until I was probably 13, 14, 15. Before that, it was just playing and having fun. We never spoke of things like that. They fought the case, we won, we went to school, and they forgot about it.
One of the reasons we haven't heard about the case is that we have a mindset in the United States that generally civil rights issues is a black-white issue. And in reality, it's much more diffuse, much more complex than just a black-white issue.
Why is the Mendez case important is like saying, why is Brown versus the Board of Education important to African Americans, and for that matter, all Americans? The Mendez case is Brown versus the Board of Education for Mexican Americans. This case desegregated schools throughout California because this was the norm, it was the practice, and it's the way Mexican children were treated.
Mendez versus Westminster Santa Ana Unified School District, El Medina Unified School District, and Garden Grove School District was very significant in that it had a ripple effect across the Southwest and was the precursor to Brown versus Board of Education, the Topeka, Kansas case that came down in 1954, which dismantled segregated schools for black children. But it also had the effect of dismantling the other de jure segregation that was in effect at that time, such as segregated housing, restaurants, swimming pools. 1 year after Mendez was decided, California repealed 2 statutes. One statute that segregated Asian American students into separate schools, and another statute that segregated Native Americans.
My father died in 1964, but he never knew about the school. My mother got to know that the school was going to be built after her, but she never did see the school. She died before the school was built. But she was very proud of it, that the school was going to be named after her.
My mom was a person of faith, and she wanted us to make sure, she wanted everybody to treat everybody with respect, the golden rule. You know, treat people as you expect them to treat you. And that's what she taught us.
My daughter, my youngest daughter, went to Riverside University, and she was reading this book, North of Mexico. And then she read, she said she started reading about her father and her brothers and her sister. She said, this is my family. And she didn't know nothing about it because I never even told her. After we fought and we got everything won and everything, we thought everything was going to go all right. So we just let the case dormant, you know. We never mentioned it. The children could go. We used to make a point. We used to take them. We live on one side of Santa Ana. We take them across the street to another school just to show them that they could go to any school they wanted, you know. Well, I'm proud. I'm proud that that at least we had the courage to do it, you know, to fight for, not for our children, but for the other children, their children and their children, you know, and for all the communities.
Well, that is a powerful story told by those who lived it. And as you can see from this film, there's a lot for us to unpack this evening. Now, we are very fortunate that Sylvia Mendez has joined us to discuss her experiences and the impact of her family's struggle for justice on her and other children in California and beyond. Before I turn to Sylvia, I wanted to read an excerpt from a book called Sylvia and Aki. It's a book appropriate for all ages and tells the story through the eyes and in the voices of Sylvia and Aki Munamitsu, who you saw in the film. Two girls who were forced by circumstances to learn harsh lessons of struggle and survival. And the book cover should be in the background. So I just want to take a few moments and read from the book. In the very first chapter, Sylvia describes the day she went with her aunt to try to register at the Westminster School. Virginia and Gonzalo, her cousin and brother, rode in the front seat, and Sylvia was squeezed between Jerome and Alice, and her brother and cousin, in the back, their forearms touching. Sylvia looked down at her hands, her skin the color of dark caramel, and then she looked at Alice's hands, which reminded her more of dulce de leche, milk candy, lighter, creamier, paler than her own. Is this why they would take Alice and Virginia, but not me, she wondered? Is it because my skin is too brown? Is this why me and my brothers were told to go to the Mexican school? But I'm not even Mexican, I'm American. What is my father going to say about this? Sylvia gazed out the window. It was so unfair to everyone. Her mother was an American citizen from Puerto Rico. Her father had come from Mexico as a little boy, but he had become a US citizen and worked hard all his life. How many times had her father told her that he wanted her to get the best education possible, to be the first in the family to finish high school, to go to college. She could hear his voice. I want you to have every opportunity I never had. Her father would be so disappointed if she didn't go to Westminster School. Now, after that disappointment, Sylvia did in fact attend the Hoover School, right, the Mexican school, for a period of time before the lawsuit was decided in her family's favor. The Hoover School was in close proximity to Westminster, but otherwise a world apart. So Sylvia recounts, the school is next to the barrio, Sylvia thought, her heart sinking even lower. She and her brothers walked together, lost in their own thoughts. The first day of third grade isn't starting out the way I hoped, Sylvia admitted to herself. Gonzalo kept his head down and his hands shoved deep in his pants pockets. Even Jerome couldn't seem to find the energy to kick a rock. After about 10 minutes of trudging along, Gonzalo said, there it is. Further along the street was a rundown, dirty clapboard building next to a cow pasture. Loose dirt and clumps of weeds surrounded the school. An empty field stood in for a playground. Sure to be dusty in warm weather, a sea of mud when it rained. No guardian trees and thick green lawns here. A faded, hand-painted sign posted above the building's front door read Hoover School. The smell of cow manure filled Sylvia's nose. This place was going to be just like all the other Mexican schools she and her brother had attended. Nothing but out-of-date hand-me-down textbooks with pages torn or missing and secondhand desks scarred with pencil marks and initials. Once again, we get the leftovers. When Sylvia's class broke for lunch, there were already several other groups outside on the back field. Sylvia sat under a shade tree with Ramona, a girl from her class who lived in the barrio. Shoo, Sylvia cried, swishing at a swarm of flies. Leave me alone. A fly landed on her bologna sandwich as she took a bite. They come from the cow pasture. You'll get used to it, Ramona said. They never go away. I'll never get used to it, Sylvia said. What other choice is there? Westminster School, she wanted to answer, but it wasn't a choice. At least not for her and Ramona. Instead, she just shrugged, waved off another fly, and took a second bite of her sandwich. Now, you heard in the film how Sylvia discussed the fence, the electric fence that separated the school from the cow pasture so that the cows wouldn't go past the fence. And I'll just read one more thing and then we're going to go right to the panel. On the ride home, Sylvia thought about the second grader. This is a second grader who touched that fence and got an electric shock. She remembered his cry and then his pain, embarrassment, and shame. Her mind wandered to her father and his efforts to break down the barrier that kept her from Westminster School, from a good education. He's not going to back down, Sylvia thought, but I sure hope he doesn't get burned. So let's turn now to our very, very distinguished panel. There's, again, so much to talk about. I want to start with Sylvia. Sylvia, thank you for being here and for sharing you and your family's story with us this evening. The film is just beautiful, and it's such a pleasure to see you again, and even though virtually, and be able to talk about this. Please talk about your experiences and how you felt attending Hoover so close to the school that refused to let you register.
Well, I want to thank everybody for having me here included in the celebration of the 74th anniversary of Mendez versus Westminster. Thank you so much. I am so excited how this all has come about. Thank you for having it today. I recall everything about that horrible school at that time, especially like you said, the fence with that. And I really did not want to go, but all this time, what would happen was that they would pick us up in the farm in a bus. We lived in a white neighborhood with all the little white children. We would drive on the bus and they would drop us off in the white school. And in front of the white school, they would drop Gonzalo Geronimo and I, and we had to walk from that white school all the way into the barrio and going to that school. And all this time, at that time, they had already started fighting my parents. And all this time I was thinking, I am going to go to that school someday and play in that playground, because as you notice, our school, the Hoover School, had a dirt on the floor, and we didn't have a playground. We didn't have monkey bars. We didn't have swings. And all I would think, someday I'm going to go to that school. So all this time, I am so excited about my parents, what they're fighting for, that someday they're going to get me to the school. And all this time, I'm thinking the only reason they're going to get me to that school was because it had a beautiful playground. Never realizing what they were fighting for. Being in court every day when I finally started going to court, sitting in the front row and not exactly knowing what they were fighting for.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. And I know in the book that you do talk a little bit about that experience of being in the courtroom and the officials from the school talking about the Mexican children and the Mexican families and explaining why they couldn't attend the school. And I thought of the indignities that your family suffered and yet stood so proud in the courtroom and the lawyers who were defending them. But you as a child, such a very different view of the world. As I said at the beginning, you and Aki, the Japanese American children, of course, who went to the internment camp, suffering these indignities and learning about a world that was so different from what your parents protected you from. So it must have been very, very difficult to be in that courtroom. What did you think of lawyers? I mean, you had a lawyer representing you, you had a lawyer representing the schools.
I really didn't even think about it. All I was thinking about is going to that good school that they were fighting for and what they were fighting for, never realizing what they were fighting for, the injustice that was going on in that school, the injustice that was going around in the neighborhood, the injustice that was going on in the barrios. Never even realized that till I was older, till I finally the case was won, and I finally ended up going into a white school. That's when I finally realized exactly what they were fighting for.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about that, because you did attend Westminster. How were you received by the teachers and the other children? And you're talking about that's when you realize how your community, you and your family, are being shortchanged or being mistreated. What was that experience like once your eyes are open? I know that many people who are watching have probably had that same kind of experience in that moment when you see the things your community is not allowed to enjoy.
Because what happened during all this time that I was in court, my parents were protecting me. So I really didn't see any prejudice or any, as we went to court every day. But it was when I entered that school, I'll never forget, thinking, I'm finally getting to that school with a playground. And so the teacher had been warned that Gonzalo was going to bring his children to that school. So she was really nice when I entered that school and said, everybody say hi to Sylvia. And I was so excited to be in that school. I said, hi to everybody. And it wasn't until the school bell rang. And that's when we went out to play that this little white boy comes up and says, ooh, what are you doing here? Ooh, you shouldn't be here. You're a Mexican. Who said you Mexicans could come to the school? You're not even supposed to be here. And it was at that moment that I started to cry and couldn't realize why he doesn't like me. Why is he talking to me like that? And I cried the whole day, and I went home and I said to my mother, they don't want me in that school. I'm not going back to that school. And that's when she said, Silvia, ¿que no sabes lo que estábamos peleando? You were there every day, sitting there. Yes, to get to that school with a playground. She said, no, Silvia, that is not what we were fighting for. We were fighting because in this country, we're all equal and we all deserve the same equal education. And yes, you're going back to that school. And yes, I returned to that school the next day. And yes, I discovered exactly what they were fighting for. And I was already 9 years old, going on 10, when we finally entered that white school in Santana. And I discovered that not everybody's born with prejudice. Not everybody's a bigot. Not everybody's a hater. Because that little boy continued to be mean to my brothers, Gonzalo and Geronimo, and they were approached differently than I approached him. And before you know it, we were being invited to their homes, and I grew up in an integrated system in Santana at that time, and was very happy that my parents had fought for integration of schools.
Yes, it's very interesting, that argument about the impact on the targeted children, in this case, the Mexican American, the Latino children, the feeling inferior, right? Sort of the way you were crying and saying, you know, why doesn't he like me? Feeling that inferiority. The converse of that is true, which is reflected in your interaction with that little boy, right? That the white children feel superior, right? That's the converse of that, that you're harmed in a particular way, but it reinforces this systemic racism, this systemic oppression by making these children, who they're children, believe that somehow they're better, and not knowing any better, because of course they didn't interact with Mexicans. So it's a lot to ask of a child to do what you did. What sustained you during that time to keep going back? Was it that the other children were good? What was going on there?
It was so exciting that the other children were so nice to me and inviting me to their home. And the teacher was really nice too at that time in the white school. And everybody that was at the school. And it was only a few that were prejudiced and had, I figured that it had to come from their home, from their families. How do children learn to hate other nationalities? How does this come about? And I also learned from then on to this day that there will always be somebody like that child. And through life, I have experienced so much discrimination, but this is why I love to go and speak to students about the importance of education and to find out who you are and to believe in yourself and to stand up to anybody that confronts you like the little boy confronted me that day.
Yeah, well, it takes a lot of courage to go back the next day and stand your ground. So we thank you for that, because it really is very hard to suffer those kinds of indignities, but it shows in your strength of character. Even as a child, you had that kind of strong personality and that ability to do it. I'm going to ask the question that's on everybody's lips, and I'm absolutely sure of it. What was it like to receive the Medal of Freedom from President Obama?
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know what a Medal of Freedom was. So when they called, they have interns at the White House. This young lady called and said, you received a Medal of Freedom. I didn't even know what the Medal of Freedom was. So I just hung up on her. I thought it was just another certificate that I was going to get for speaking, because I get little paper certificates when I go and speak at a high school. So I hung up on her, and they called back and they said, Miss Mendez, you have to come to the White House and receive this. And the first thing I did was call a teacher, and I said, what is this Medal of Freedom they're talking about? And that's when she explained what the honor that I was receiving. When I got there, I'll never forget, I was in a room with Warren Buffett and Maya Angelou. She received it the same day I did, Russell, and another baseball player. And I was sitting there so scared in the corner, and saying, well, I have not done nothing. Why am I here, But everybody was so lovable. I went over there and I kissed Maya Angelou. And I says, oh, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy to be in the same room with you. And I'll never remember how she said, oh, honey, it's so nice to know you. And it made me feel just wonderful when she said that. So it was just an exciting, thrilling moment, something that you'd never expect, in life. And that's what I tell students, you have to persevere, stay in school, and you'll never know what your reward will be someday.
Well, it's an incredible story, as you're saying, of perseverance, but of true courage. Your parents, with all that was going on, to be able to do this, you and your siblings to walk into those schools, even when some children didn't want you there, some parents didn't want you there. Nevertheless, you stood strong, and we're so grateful to you. I'm going to come back, but I want to talk to Sandra now for a little bit. Sandra, this is a tremendous piece of art that you have put together. How did you hear about this lawsuit? I mean, as I said, I was a law professor, and I had never heard about this until I heard you and Sylvia, and I saw your documentary. How did you hear about the litigation? What prompted you to make this documentary?
Well, thank you so much. Well, I want to send out a shout out first to Roberto Lebron, with the Attorney General's office, because he's who I got a chance to meet all of you when we went to the Puerto Rican Day Parade, because as you know, Felicitas Mendez was Puerto Rican, and so we wanted to have all the Boricuas out there in New York celebrate Mendez. But I grew up in Westminster myself, and I never heard of the case until I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table one day and reading an article about the school that was going to be built named in honor of the Mendez family. And I don't know if you've ever had a moment where you learned something about somebody or someplace that you felt you knew intimately, and this something was so opposite everything you ever believed that it just blew your mind. So as I was sitting at my mom's kitchen table that day, I could feel the kitchen walls start spinning around me. And when I looked up from the newspapers, there were so many emotions. I was angry and guilty and shamed and elated to find out about this story. And at that moment, I was home full time with my children, and I didn't know how, I didn't know what, but I knew by the time I was done that everybody was going to know about Mendez versus Westminster, because there were so many life truths. It felt like a download of every sociology class I had, every history class I had, everything. Just suddenly stuff came together in a whole new way that revealed an entirely different picture of American civil rights history that I understood in a way that I knew that the stories we tell us who we are and who we can be. And this story had to be told in our schools so that children of all colors could see a story of people of all colors working together to end an injustice. And that's been my passion ever since.
It's a tremendous testament, and obviously you've received awards for it, but it really is a beautiful piece of work, and we thank you so much for it. Every person in the country needs to thank you for this work. I'd like to ask you, what were the challenges that you faced in completing it, promoting the film? I mean, how long did it take to do this? Was it difficult to find the people you wanted to interview? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it was a challenge, and this is something I tell students that I remember when I was in my sociology class, I had a class in social movements, and one day a professor said to us, "My students don't like to know this, but you need to know that history takes time." And I remember sitting in his class going, "What do you mean we need time? We don't have time for time. Things are all messed up." But the day I learned about Mendez, I did the math. I go, "Oh my gosh, this is what he meant. The case started in 43. The decision was in 45. The appeal in 46. Brown in 57. Brown in 54. Little Rock in 57. Civil Rights Act in 64. If I want to get Mendez taught in our school, I'm going to have to get started now." So it wasn't even until a few years after I learned of Mendez that my daughter entered school, and I went back to school and took TV production classes. So I had to go to school, take TV production classes. I became the world's oldest intern. And then when I finally had the opportunity to do the Mendez documentary, they said, "No budget, no pay." Who knows that story, right? And then I only had a small amount of time to do this story, when the longest story I'd ever told that went on air was maybe 3 minutes. And so now to fill the story for 30 minutes was going to be a new challenge to learn how that happened. And so I had to rely on people whose expertise would help me to make that I could trust. So Christopher Arreola, he's done a lot of Mendez research. Judge Aguirre is in Orange County, and he had known a lot about Mendez. I found one of the things that was most important to me, because this story is so rich and thick, I thought, I want to tell a story. We're just going to get this party started, because this is a desegregation story that has so many antennae. I just want to get this party started. We're going to kick the door open and hopefully find more and more of the story, because the Mendez case is a class action suit. And I didn't even realize until I learned about Mendez that Brown is a class action suit. And we only hear of the Brown family, but there are over 80 families involved with that case. And similarly with Mendez, even though there are only 5 families, you'd think that would be something easy to do. But you have to remember, at the time when I was doing the research, we had dial-up computers, and I would put my kids to sleep, and I'd be doing research from 10 o'clock at night till 3 o'clock in the morning. And phone books, I would have to go, does anybody out there remember phone books? I would go look through a phone book this thick to try to find Ramirez, Estrada, Palomino, or Guzman. And in Spanish, that's like Smith. And to look those up from 40 years ago, 50 years ago, I thought, I'm going to have to tell a story. And the story, I have to admit, that touched me so much extended beyond the lawsuit itself. It was a story of families. The idea that the Mendez family moved to Westminster to lease land from a Japanese family that was being sent to an internment camp, that touched me. And that, for me, took the walls down to show how we're all connected in American civil rights history. And so I set out to find the Munamitsu family, which was a challenge in itself too, because again, these are families from 40 or 50 years ago. And I'm very fortunate to say that there's a network of human relations people that were able to put me in touch with Japanese American historical societies, who put me in touch with Hiroshi Kamei, who after about 15 minutes, 20 minutes on the phone, he remembered, oh yes, the Munamitsu family. And again, when I called the Munamitsus in the phone book, there was only a few, so I thought maybe I'll get lucky here. And I first contacted Janice Munamitsu's mother, and she feigned the inability to speak English. And I recognized at the time, because Japanese Americans going through the internment, that is such a hard memory to live through and relive, that she was not willing to go through that pain again. But when I found Janice, I was able then to meet Aki. And when we did the documentary, when we did the interviews for the documentary, that was the first time Sylvia and Aki had seen each other in 50 years. And that's something that makes me very, very happy. And then after having completed the documentary, of course, as an intern, you don't expect any awards. And I have to say, I am so grateful for that, because that has helped us to gain the momentum and to gain entree for things like the first time we visited the White House and get newspaper stories. But one of the things that I found most challenging, I was not really fully prepared for America's freedom of speech, let me tell you, because when you tell a story, you realize that everybody, it's like being at a baseball game. Everybody has an idea of how you should have told the story. I remember once sharing the documentary at a class for Chicano studies at a university. And I shared the documentary that had the excerpt with Robert L. Carter in it. And after the class was done and the discussion was done, the students were walking out, the professor said to me, "Why did you include Robert L. Carter in Brown versus Board of Education? We finally had a story about us and you included this." And I was like, we want to bring everybody back in this room and let's talk about this, because this is why our story has not been told, because we are not opening the doors and showing our connections. I had people criticize me for having the Munamitsus told, and that the Munamitsu family is no more than the Estrada, Ramirez, Guzman, and I missed somebody's name, and somebody's gonna find out, Palomino families. And I have to say, it's been heartbreaking for some of the other families as Mendez has risen in awareness. And I understand that heartbreak. And it's hard to say that history takes time, that these stories are gonna take time to seep and grow and build in our communities. And learning how to toughen your skin. I'm sure as attorneys, as lawyers, as judges out in the community, you guys know what it's about. As I was not prepared for that scorching, just the scorching complaints from everybody, from all sides in surprising ways. But now I feel like, let the wind blow. You know, I expect that anytime you want to get out there and do something, that's what's going to happen.
Yeah, no, that's so important. The idea of being able to tell the full story and all of the players and their respective roles without diminishing anyone's role in the story. And I do think that the film does a lovely job of that. Certainly weaving in the music, the pictures. I imagine that so many of our participants during this evening saw their families, their siblings in those pictures. Those experiences may very well have resonated. I know the first time that I went to a majority white school, I very much found that affecting, and so much of the film resonated for me in that way, even though of course I benefited from Sylvia's family and Sylvia having taken this on. So let me turn, I'm going to come back to you, Senator, but let me turn to Judge Aguirre. We're so very pleased that you could join us this evening. And as I understand it, you know so much about Orange County. Can you tell us when did you first learn about the Mendez litigation? And what was your reaction to this story of the Mendez family and the other Latino families?
Thank you very much also for inviting me and for hosting this very important panel discussion and viewing the film that Ms. Roby produced. My family came to Orange County in 1919 from Guanajuato and Michoacan, Mexico. My father was born in Placencia here in Orange County. He had to attend, and so did his cousins, uncles, and brothers and sisters, segregated schools in Placencia, a very small agricultural town in Orange County. It probably had 30% Mexican-American population. And so when the kids started we started getting more Mexican-American kids in Plasencia after the Mexican Revolution. The school district decided to establish separate Mexican schools for the Mexican-American children. And so when my dad came back from World War II in 1946, he heard about the case in 1947 when it came down in the appellate court. He didn't know about it in 1946. And of course, the school districts that were affected by the Mendez case were only 5 school districts in Orange County out of about 25 Orange County school districts. Plasencia had its own small little school district, and of course it was segregated. And so when my dad came back, he heard about the lawsuit. He went to the school board in Plasencia to lobby them to open up the schools for Mexican-American children so that all children could attend equal schools. And the school board turned him down. So he went to an attorney in Los Angeles. That attorney told him, yes, we can file the same sort of a lawsuit that was filed in Mendez, because the law is interpreted that the courts found that you cannot have separate schools for Mexican-American children. So I will file a lawsuit on your behalf in Plasencia, but go back to the school board and let them know that I'm willing to take the case. My dad did that. He went back to the school board in Plasencia. The school board, under threat of a lawsuit, they recognized the attorney's name. He happened to be the attorney for the Catholic Archdiocese of Los Angeles. My dad got his name through the local priest. And so the school board, under threat of a lawsuit in my hometown of Plasencia, relented, opened up the Anglo school for Mexican-American children to attend. So I was able to start attending an integrated school in 1951. And you know what was interesting? I look back at my class that started with me. There were about 40 of us Mexican-American children out of a total of about 90 Mexican-American children that first year, my year of kindergarten. I remember looking at my class pictures. Of those 40 Mexican-American children, 10 of us completed university education. One of us became a Superior Court judge, another became a medical doctor, 5 became school teachers, and 3 others were business people. 10 Mexican-American children out of 40 Mexican-American children achieving university educations. Prior to that, I could look, because my cousins, uncles, and aunts all went to school, and friends, I could look at maybe 1 kid a year graduating from high school, and 1 out of 10 over those years going and getting a university education. And what it showed was not only were we capable of achieving, if given an opportunity to be equally schooled, we also were leaders in our own schools. Of those 10 kids that got education and others, we were leaders in our schools. I was the student body president, and the guy that became a doctor was, was also a leader in the school. So we were helping Anglo children achieve their potential too, because we as Mexican-American high achievers were bringing up the bar in our schools. So I knew about the Mendez case as a youngster, but I never read about it when I went to USC and I was a history major there, or when I was at UCLA School of Law. Never heard about it, read about it, but I knew about it because I was a benefactor of the legacy that the Mendez case stood for.
And what was your experience? That's very interesting. What was your experience then? Sort of, you're not Sylvia's generation in the sense of she's the first to go into that school because they win the lawsuit. You're saying you're the benefactor. What was your experience as a child going into those schools?
We were met because all of my fellow Mexican American students and I that went there were met equally with all the other children because we were already ahead of the game, so to speak. Most of our parents were longtime residents. Many of them were born here in the United States, so many of them spoke English very well. In my particular case, both my parents were born here in the United States, so we only spoke English at home. I had to speak Spanish in order to communicate with my grandmother who came from Mexico in 1919. So we were welcomed. Now, there were some kids, because they were darker in skin color, that did face taunting from other students. So I think a lot of it was based on color. I had cousins that were darker than me that had problems. They would come back from school, after fighting and things like that, because they would say that, they were called names and things of that nature. But the teachers, the schools, pretty much embraced us as students coming in. We didn't get set aside. We were allowed to compete, but and I remember from kindergarten, first grade, second grade, all of us kids were competing athletically and academically with all the other kids in that small school.
Yeah, well, that is also interesting, this point you're making, which I do think race and colorism is ever present. It is an ever present part of the Latino story. There is no way around it. And certainly from that excerpt I read originally from Sylvia and Aki, of course, when Sylvia herself is understanding at such a young age this difference because of the color of skin between herself and her cousins. And so it really is a very powerful part of the story, which is why I think this case of having the NAACP Judge Carter, not at the time, obviously, Judge Carter and Thurgood Marshall and his team, the American Jewish Council, so many different groups, the ACLU, so very interested in participating in this. So few of us are able to be lawyers, and so few of us are able to be judges. And you have achieved both of these goals in your life, and I know there's more to come. But as a former lawyer, as a judge, what do you view as the legal significance of this litigation from today's vantage point? I mean, we understand the role of desegregation, and now we've been having this robust conversation of the reality of being in those environments, right? The impact it has on you educationally and the struggles at the time. But what do you view from our legal lens, right? Our participants, lawyers and judges, were thinking also from the perspective of the development of the law. What do you see, again, looking back from today, with the wisdom from today, the legal significance of the case?
Well, a couple of things. Obviously, we are all familiar with Plessy versus Ferguson and how it applied to education to keep separate but equal schools alive across the country. And what I find significant about the Mendez case is that here we have courageous Mexican-American father and a Puerto Rican mother who take on, in Orange County, California, the birthplace of the John Birch Society, the Proposition 187, the last Ku Klux Klan, the largest Ku Klux Klan convention outside of the South was held here in 1927 in Anaheim, California. So you have all of these things, and here you've got this courageous family and others in 1945 that take on that concept of segregated educational facilities and take it on, forthwith, courageously, and then with other people, other goodwill Americans coming in We've got Japanese American attorneys through the Japanese American Citizens League. We've got Jewish American attorneys, A.L. Weirin, Abraham Lincoln Weirin, with the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild. We have Lauren Miller, an African American attorney in Los Angeles. We've got the National Jewish Congress. We've got all of these people of goodwill coming in. And then, of course, Lauren Miller, with his contacts in the African American community, brings in Thurgood Marshall and Robert Carter with the NAACP. So all of a sudden, here in rural agricultural Orange County, here's a group of Latinos that are at the forefront of educational opportunity for all children. So the concept of separate schools for any children is dismantled completely by Judge McCormick's very powerful decision. But of course, he was led to that decision, not just by his good conscience, but by the skillful artwork, legal work of David Marcus, a Jewish American attorney who very skillfully leads that case. And you see the same arguments that are made in the Mendez case are later duplicated in Brown versus Board of Education. You have men like Dr. Ralph Deals from UCLA, who says that by placing children in different categories, you're saying that the white children are superior and the Mexican American children are inferior. And that's the same kind of concept that is used in Brown versus Board of Education. And you see how that evidences itself in Warren's decision. And I think here's another interesting point. Earl Warren, as we all know, was not from the East Coast. He was born in Los Angeles. His father was an immigrant from Norway. His last name actually was Varin, and his mother was an immigrant from Sweden. They came, and the father worked in the railroads, laying track, probably right next to Mexican American men that were laying railroad tracks in Bakersfield. So you had Earl Warren being raised on the West Coast during the 1910s, 20s, and 30s, when there were very few African Americans living on the West Coast. African Americans really didn't come into play on the West Coast until during the war, World War II. Up to that point, the only other groups that were here, of course, we had some Asians, and then we had Native Americans, but the real group that was adversely affected were Mexican Americans. So Warren grew up around Mexican Americans. He understood that we were, white, but really second-class citizens, and we were treated that way. And so when he heard about this case, he had his Attorney General, Robert Kinney, file an amicus brief in the appellate court case. And of course, I think Warren also heard about the case that came out of San Diego, Alvarez versus Lemon Grove. And that was a similar case, but it was in the Superior Court, not in the federal court. In either case, the concept, the foundation was set in Warren's mind here in the 1940s. So when he got appointed in 1953 by President Eisenhower as the Chief Justice, then he was able to help meld the minds of Frankfurter and Douglas and Jackson and Black and all the other Supreme Court justices and encourage them to find segregated schools to be unequal.
Yeah. So Earl Warren has a very interesting, I won't say checkered, but a very interesting history, of course, as governor during the Japanese internment. And of course, at first, these are segregated schools, and then you have the lawsuit that results in desegregation. So it's a very interesting history and a long journey for him leading to Brown.
And there was something else that happened along the way too. You had Hernandez versus Texas that came along, a very critical case involving Mexican Americans serving on juries. And he was able to understand the concepts in that case. And he authored that case also in 1954. I think it came out right about the same time that Brown came out. And then, of course, he authored another case involving Latinos, Miranda.
Yes. Yes, well, there was, I think, that understanding during that Chief Justice's tenure of the impact on people of color and that impact of inferiority and the superiority complex and the tension. Let me, thank you so much, Judge. Let me quickly turn to Jose Perez. Thank you for joining us. We all know your tremendous work with the Latino Civil Rights Organization, Latino Justice Pearl Deaf. You spent years working on civil rights issues, and certainly the organization is well known for its work on educational rights for Latino children. When did you first hear about the litigation? What was your reaction? And then I'm just going to put the questions out there for you. As a civil rights lawyer, what do you view as the most significant part of this litigation, given the various determinations at the trial court, the Ninth Circuit decisions? If you could share with us your thoughts about that as a lawyer, as well as a civil rights lawyer.
Thank you, Judge Rivera. Thank you to Judge Manzanet and Judge Frias Colon for organizing and hosting this program, and inviting Latino Justice Pearl Deaf to co-sponsor. I am delighted to participate on this esteemed panel and to see my dear friends, at least virtually, Sandra and Sylvia, who, again, I met a number of years ago on a screening of when they were touring the country in Sandra driving her orange white VW Mendez v. Westminster van there. I also have to give credit to my dear friend and colleague, Roberto Lebron, who is then, I believe, president of the Puerto Rican Bar Association, who wanted to highlight the importance of this case and this documentary which had come out. And again, as Sandra alluded to, little known fact, right, that Felicita's family came from Puerto Rico. So it was a Puerto Rican, really Mexican family that was one among the lead families that brought this lawsuit. And so I did not learn this case, never heard of it in law school or constitutional law. And not surprisingly, you as a law professor had not, it was not something that it was taught, at least here in law schools on the East Coast, when it should in fact be a core part of any constitutional law curriculum. There are a number of cases, again, the Latino civil rights movement, Judge Aguirre referred to Hernandez v. Texas out of Texas, right? Again, a case brought by actually Mexican-American lawyers in that case in Texas, in which, again, Mexicans were recognized as a distinct class, not a white class. And I think that's a little known fact in this case, in the Mendez case, is that there was a trial stipulation that, again, between plaintiffs and defendants, that Mexicans were treated, was not about race. It was that they were considered white under the stipulated facts of the Mendez case. And so there were some nuances, and that this case was actually brought by a group of Mexican families in California to challenge this, independent of the greater, the ongoing effort brought by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the legendary Thurgood Marshall and his trial team, strategizing to build a strategy of developing cases over the years to challenge Plessy v. Ferguson. And again, which upheld separate but equal was okay, was constitutionally permissible. And so what you had here is a case that gave them really the ammunition, or built the foundation, that case, that Plessy v. Ferguson was not in fact constitutional. And in fact, it should be known that the county boards, their counsel, that was one of their defenses. And on appeal, they raised that there was an independent line of cases dating back to Plessy that separate but equal was permissible, that the local county school boards were engaged in permissible activity. And so the court clearly rejected that. I think Judge Aguirre clearly referred to the brilliance of the trial lawyer who brought the case, plaintiff's lawyer David Marcus, really developing a trial record, the evidence, children testifying, parents testifying, families testifying, social scientists, academics, again, about the inherent impact upon children being segregated, that even if they had the same textbooks, even if they had the same playground, playgrounds, even if they had the same teachers, it wasn't enough. Again, because being only with Mexican children with Mexican children, white children with white children, had deleterious long-term effects. And so I think that brilliance, developing a record that was really unassailable on review, and so kudos to that. And then the support that he got, as Judge Aguirre referred to, the ACLU and the National Lawyers Guild came in with amicus briefs and support on the trial court level, and on appeal to the Ninth Circuit, they again renewed their support, as did a Japanese American group, as did the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and as did the Attorney General's office as well, recognizing again that there, as a civil rights lawyer. So again, what do we think? Tactics, building your record. One, we need plaintiffs. And I think, Mr. Mendez fought for what he believed, what was right, what was just. Ms. Mendez, if I recall, your father, had been in the service, as many of the other families coming back into California. No, maybe not, but then maybe, but again, folks who had served their country nobly coming back, and then again, moving into this area. The local school was an acceptable school, was a preferred school, and his children could not go there. That was unjust in his mind and his view. And it was fighting for him and the other families in that area that why automatically these local school boards were taking the position because they were Mexican. They could not, they assumed they could not understand or speak English sufficiently. And they came up with their pretext, a test without any really basis or scientific basis. And again, we know this right in history that these tests, these standardized tests, do they truly measure competence and intelligence and intellect, and using that as a pretext? And it was only the Mexican children and the Mexican families that were affected. Other races or other children were not segregated as the Mexican families were specifically targeted. And again, the other part of this was there was existing California law already that prohibited this behavior. So between that, the trial record, violation of law, the trial judge had no problem finding that, in fact, the local school board districts had violated the Equal Protection Clause, that states and localities, and this was under state action, that they could not violate the rights of these families. And so a major precedent, that the story that needs to be told. So my kudos to Sandra, really, and Ms. Mendez for telling the story, for reminding us of our families and our communities, that we are part of this struggle. And again, the unique parts, I think, here are the synergies, right? The crossover between the support from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the fact that Ms. Mendez's family was able to move to this area because of the policies of California and the United States in interring Japanese Americans during the Second World War. And so I think the broader implications that we share many more shared stories and experiences, and we work together and collaborate, that we can change the world, that we can make it a better place, that we can make it a fair and just a society that we all aspire to.
So on that note, Jose, and it'll be the last question because we're unfortunately running out of time, and we want to get to the questions that are in the chat, some very good questions. But let me ask you this. Given that today, Latino students and African American students are more segregated than they were pre-Brown, and we know the consequences of that, not just some of the things we've been talking about, but the educational outcome consequences of that are always disadvantageous for the students of color. What do we need to do now? So we've learned from Mendez, we've learned from Brown. What are these next steps? What do you see as the cutting edge civil rights educational agenda? You get 30 seconds to tell us that agenda.
Yeah,
no, a little bit more.
Okay. Education inequality we know exists. There are lawsuits brought recently here in New York, in Boston, Fairfax, Virginia, by certain groups, certain foundations that I will not mention in this program, that are seeking to challenge these opportunities to provide fairness. Again, we know when you talk about education and inequality, it deals with, and as the documentary reveals, and I think Chris Ariola mentioned this, there was broad-based segregation desegregation. It wasn't just about schools, it was about housing, it was about economic opportunities, it was about jobs. So again, we have now this economic inequality that, you know, that folks are living only in certain neighborhoods. They only go to the schools in their neighborhoods, and these are the inferior schools. They're not the same schools. They're not funded. They don't have the same resources. And so I think, you know, our children, our community should have equal opportunity to access these elite schools and other opportunities to open up the gateways of education. It's through education that our community, we see a better future for our children and our families.
Hear, hear, so true. All right, so we've got several questions. We have a few minutes and then we have to leave time for the closing. So I'm going to do this in two clusters because they seem to fall into these two groups. So one set of questions is about what we can do to better publicize this case. How can we get it to the students, both in grammar school, high school, and then the higher education, college, law school? What can we do so that people know about this case?
Hello,
Sylvia, I know you've been with Sandra and Sylvia. One of the two of you at least chime in on this. I know the two of you are working very hard on this.
So if I could chime in, I know that there are several efforts that are going on. One thing is that in the state of California has developed some new ethnic studies guidelines, and Mendez is included in the ethnic studies guidelines. So that's great news. That's been years in the works. However, the thing is, teachers can't teach it if they don't know Mendez. So I'm working on a couple of projects out here in Orange County, hoping to reach across the state, especially for the 75-year anniversary of Mendez. I've got two projects, in fact, just launched one today. It's called Plant Peace. I'm gonna show you this really quick here. Plant Peace. And so we're planting sunflower seeds for the 75-year anniversary of Mendez versus Westminster. And they should grow starting from April 14th, the anniversary, through June 14th, which will be the anniversary of the day that Earl Warren signed the bill that repealed the segregation statutes that existed in California's cases. So these are giant sunflowers. We're hoping to get them to all school children and colleges and teachers in Orange County. Growing it from here, I've planted 5,006 seeds to represent the 5,000 children and the Munamitsu, Mendez, and the 5 families of the case. So we're doing that. And also we're starting a fun project called Random Act of Mendez that will be launching during Hispanic Heritage Month to get teachers on board. I have made my documentary available for free online, and I'm starting a website to post syllabi for all teachers so that they can have a place to access the information so they can teach Mendez.
Thank you so much.
Fun stuff and traditions.
Thank you so much.
Other things going on too.
Thank you. Thank you. Sylvia, we want to make sure that you're able to address this because I know that it has been your life's work focusing on talking to kids and certainly talking to children about the importance of education.
Well, I'm so excited that California has finally concluded that we are going to have diversity taught in all the schools. That was just mentioned about a month ago. And Mendez is going to be included. And the Orange County School Board has department has the curriculum already written for it. So anybody that wants it can get it from them. And they're working on it, on making sure that all the schools learn about Mendez versus Westminster in California right now. So we are way ahead now trying to, what we started 20 years ago, Sandra and I trying to get it into the school systems. We're getting it here in California, but we still have to make sure that it goes across the country, which is going to be another struggle to try and get that done.
Great, great. There's another set of questions that are asking, and it's a near and dear area of inquiry for me, asking about the role of the women in the civil rights movement, in supporting the cause, the role of your mom in making it possible for your family to pursue this litigation. So maybe we could talk a little bit about that. I know that there was much made of the fact that many people may know of Judge Constance Baker Motley, and she didn't really get her due until later on. The significant role she played when it came to the work of the NAACP. I mean, she was very well known in those spheres, but again, men, for many reasons, were the ones who were the focus most of the time. But so we have these questions. I want to have an opportunity, Sylvia, for you to talk about that, and then the other panelists to address possibly this this bigger question about the role of women in the movement. So your mom and the other women, there were women, of course, on the film.
Absolutely. One of the things that happened with why Mendez is known across the country right now and across the United States is because of my mother, because she never forgot what had happened. And when she got very sick towards the end of her life, she wanted to make sure that everybody knew about it. And we all knew about it, but she wanted to make sure that everybody knew about it. And she's the one that started telling the whole family that she wanted it to be told across the country. And that's how Sandra found out about Mendez School was being built. And that was because of my niece, Johanna, that went around all Orange County and got over 1,000 names on a petition to have that school named, because they didn't want to name it Gonzalo and Felicitas Mendez in Orange County. And that was all my mother's doing, by making sure and telling the family, we have to make sure that this is known all over, because it was Latinos that were able to accomplish this, the 5 Latino families that did this. And she kept on with all of us, making sure that we and that's how I got started going around the country with Sandra Roby, speaking about Mendez versus Westminster. In over 20 years, I have gone all over to every state, I think, and spoken about it. It was my mother that said, Sylvia, you have to go out there. And I says, no, I can't do this, mother, I'm a nurse. And she said, absolutely you can. No, I can't. I remember pleading here in the same house that I'm right now. I cannot go out there. I'm a nurse. I cannot stand in front of students. And it was students that gave me the courage to continue. I remember going to a school. I was so scared standing up in front of them. And they're the ones that said, Ms. Mendez, just tell us the story. And after I finished, I gave them a little piece of paper, and they're the ones that said, and I said, should I continue doing this? And they're the ones that said, yes, continue telling the story. So my mother, to the very end of her life, was the one that makes sure that this story was told all over the world, because she realized what they had done. And nobody had even said gracias to my dad. And my dad died very young at 51 years old and didn't even get a thank you. But at least my mother knew that 2 schools were going to have her name on it. And she's the one that wanted to make sure that everybody know that Latinos have always been fighting for justice and equality and education here in the United States.
Well, your parents left quite the legacy. Your mother and father were clearly a partnership in this, and we are so grateful, all of us who have our careers in our lives, because you all were willing to deal with all of the challenges night and day and work on this all the time.
We
So
have the other women that were so important in the case, like Ms. Guzman, that had been fighting. She had hired a lawyer. Of course, that lawyer, Bernal, was not able to help her, but at least she had been trying to get her son into a school there in Santana that was only a few blocks away from her house. And still she had to send her son all the way about 5 blocks into Latino. So Ms. Guzman she's a woman that had fought for education all her life too. And there were other women that came in and helped, so many of them.
yeah, the tenacity in the face of all challenges and all obstacles against you. We've got 2 minutes tops. Let me let Judge Aguirre and Jose Perez, if they want to comment on sort of women, sort of writ large, lawyers, judges, but also women in these movements and the challenges they're facing and the role that they played.
With regards to Felicitas Mendez, you can see the quiet dignity that she embodied. She didn't even tell her younger children about the struggles that she and her husband endured so that all children could have an equal opportunity in education. And I think that portrait needs to be told, that needs to be aired. You're asking, how can Mendez be told? Well, we here in America, we get our education, first of all, in grammar school, the first basis. So it seems to me the curriculum in grammar schools has to include in our history classes a day or 2 on the Mendez case. Second, our law schools need to embrace the case as part of their constitutional law classes that are given, and give it its due place as the genesis of Brown versus Board of Education. And the third thing, we need to get into the movies. So a feature film showing the quiet dignity of Mrs. Mendez, an American, Puerto Rican American, showing her and how she dealt with this issue, I think needs to be brought to the forefront, just as we have seen films on, what's the name of that African-American lady that sat in the bus in Birmingham, Alabama?
Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks.
Exactly.
Rosa Parks. Okay, great. Thank you. I'm sorry to cut you off. Jose, you want to close it off? One last comment?
Women are an integral and indispensable part of the civil rights movement. No argument. There is gender inequality as there is racial inequality. And what can we all do is, like, again, all of us who sat in, the 300 plus people, you are now Mendez v. Westminster ambassadors. Take this case, take this film to your schools, your children's schools, your grandchildren's school. When I met Sylvia and Sandra at the Puerto Rican bar function that Mr. LeBron organized, I got them to come to my son's school so the parents of multicultural children could educate all the children and families in our school. So I challenge everyone who's attended this program to do that, expand the message, and then we'll have one hell of a 75th anniversary next year.
Great. Thank you so much. It's been quite an incredible evening. The conversation has been robust and candid. I want to thank everyone on the panel. Sylvia, again, for your courage and all the work you continue to do, and for your family, everything that they've done for us. Sandra, for this incredible piece of artwork and sharing it with us and the world, and your continued commitment to social justice. Judge Aguirre, thank you again for sharing both your personal story and your insights as a lawyer and judge on these issues. We're so grateful that you were able to take the time today. And of course, Jose Perez, one of our champion civil rights lawyers, we thank you every day for everything you're doing to make sure that we all have an opportunity to live with dignity in a world that's fair and just. And I'm going to throw the gauntlet down, just as you did, to the Latino Judges Association, and consider doing a reenactment or a dramatization of the Mendez v. Westminster case, both the trial and the Ninth Circuit argument. I think that would be something very interesting. So I'm going to turn it over for the closing to Judge Javier Vargas. And I thank you all. I'm so proud to have been part of this. Good luck to everyone. I hope it won't be 20 years again till I see you, Sandra and Sylvia.
Thank you.
Wow, this was a truly touching, inspirational, and educational program. The story of Sylvia and Aki, as well as Judge Aguirre's statements about the diverse attorneys who work on this case, especially resonated with me, because it reminds us that strength comes from communities of color working together towards equality and justice. Good evening, everybody. The Latino Judges Association would like to thank Judge Rivera for so expertly moderating the panel, as well as Jose Perez, Sandra Roby, Judge Aguirre, and of course, Sylvia Mendez. Without her courage and her parents' advocacy, we wouldn't be here today. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you also to our co-sponsors in alphabetical order: the Center for Latinx Rights and Equality at CUNY Law School, the Franklin H. Williams Judicial Commission, the Historical Society of New York Courts, Latino Justice Pearl Dev, and the New York State Judicial Institute. We also want to thank John Carr for highlighting us on his New York Courts podcast series called Amici. We're also especially appreciative of the Bronx Women's Bar Association and their president, Miguelina Camilo, who made this evening possible by being our Zoom host. Finally, we want to thank you, the viewers, for being virtually here, saying presente, as part of this historical event, listening to this human story. We ask, like Jose Perez stated, that you use your platforms and networks to share this groundbreaking story so that we never forget the importance of Mendez versus Westminster in the history of desegregation of this country. Buenas noches a todos y gracias.